So welcome back to this three-part series of the outstanding life of the entrepreneur Franz Buchenberger. He built, scaled and exited several businesses in a row. So his career was a roller coaster with a lot of ups and downs, and he had to start almost from zero 3 times in a row. After watching this video, you will not only have some great key takeaways.
I think the most important learning purely from a business side was this window of opportunity, right?
You will experience hands-on what it might take to build a successful business.
The first year there was not a single week where I worked less than 100 hours. I was commuting every month between Munich and San Francisco. Hired like 30 people in the first attempt, went down to 5, went up to 50 again.
So what happened to the company?
The IPO, we were valued at about 200 million euros, and then the valuation went down, and 6 months later it was bankrupt.
So why did it crash? Watch this and enjoy figuring it out. Let's get started.
All right.
Franz, you are so welcome being here, and I was looking forward to this because you have built multiple businesses, at least 3 that I know of. You exited most of them. And your story, I think, is one that can be a really good example. It could be really inspiring for young entrepreneurs as well, because not the let's get quick rich path that you see on YouTube every day long, right?
At least that didn't work out this way.
And I would love to talk about like your personal story, how you build your software businesses. You are a tech guy, a software guy, a SaaS guy. And I would really like to talk about that and maybe spend some time talking about how does it feel to have an exit and how does life look like after an exit as well in the end. So
Yeah, okay. Look, very much forward to this discussion, David. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Welcome. So maybe how did you get started in software, right? And when was the specific point in time that you actually decided to build your own business instead of working for a big corp out there?
Yeah, well, from my background, it was not obvious that I would become a software startup founder or something like this. I remember when I was finished with gymnasium high school, I was considering what I could do, and I eliminated all these things I would not want to do, and there were only a few left. And one was I studied computer science.
All right.
And then my first 10 years I worked for what you would call today a scale-up, a company which was about 200 people when I joined. And over those 10 years it grew to 2,000 people and finally had its exit being sold to BMW at that time. And that was in the 80s and 90s. And this was a rare software product business in Germany, right? At that time, there were very few product companies. Basically, it was SAP, Software AG, and this company I worked for in Munich. So I had an opportunity to learn really about product development, right? So I changed jobs a lot. I started as programmer, then I became architect, then I went into product management, partner management, strategic planning. And I also moved to the US for 1 year, which was very helpful for me to learn about US software business. And I moved over with 3 little kids between 1 and 5 years at that time.
Wow, big step.
Big step, yeah. If I think back, sounds a lot crazy. I always had to go to North Carolina on Monday and came back on Thursday, leaving my company. And was in partner management at that time. So I worked in an IBM lab in North Carolina. Yeah, I learned a lot about all the different aspects of a software business. And then it was in the middle of the 90s when the internet started. I realized that some US companies started with something that I was very, very, very eager to do, which was building virtual worlds, what later on was called Metaverse. So I was always a sci-fi fan and read a lot of science fiction books. So I was very eager to get into this kind of virtual world business. So I flew over to San Francisco, met with one of those companies. They were very arrogant. And so I decided I would just start my own business.
Cool. So that sounds a little bit like a Netflix story, right? Do you know the one from, was it Google Maps or something, right? Google Earth, right?
Yeah.
Google Earth,
yes.
Where they flew over, had all those meetings in the valley.
Yeah, I remember I saw it on Netflix,
cool.
Yes.
Maybe the same time.
Maybe about the same time,
Maybe about the same
It
time.
was 95, or we started the company in 95. This was probably 94. Really, when the Netscape browser was the first internet browser, everything was very basic, just a few million internet users, yeah.
So how did you actually do the decision of starting your own company? What was the purpose behind it? So why you, and why not join the company? Why not join another one's company as a co-founder? Why did you do that?
I think I would have joined these US companies if they would have invited me. They didn't know what to do with a German guy, and they were just in the startup mode in the US, right? I was very eager to do this topic, right? This was very much related to what I wanted to do. Not at all getting rich or being not even successful, right? Just doing what I wanted to do. It was based on this 10 years experience in this Munich based software company, right? And in the past 3 or 4 years before I left, it was taken over by BMW step by step. And that changed the whole company, which had a kind of wonderful culture before, and then it became like a corporate battlefield. And a lot of things that were very motivating kind of changed in the opposite. But there were a lot of tremendous people there. And so I just took, sounds a bit bad, the 10 best engineers from this company and some other people.
Sounds like a good strategy, at least.
Yeah, and we started the company with 8 founders.
Wow, 8 founders.
8 founders. It was 5 really world-class engineers.
Wow.
And 1 CFO and 1 evangelist and me as CEO. And so it was just the circumstances, right? There was no big plan, and that's how we got in this business.
How did you do the decision to be the CEO of the company?
I think because I had the vision and the motivation, and all these kind of people from the company were motivated to do something else, but they did not know how to do it.
Yes.
And I was claiming I have a plan, and of course we needed funding. So I think I was told I was the first German raising US venture capital at that time for a software business. So our first investor was a US venture capitalist out of Boston, and nobody believed it that we could raise money, but we did. So we started the company at that time with 5 million Deutschmark before being founded, right? We first had the kind of funding agreement and then started the company, really.
Would you agree, like a CEO, one part of your job at least is to always come up with a plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the key requirements, I would say.
What happened? Like you had this topic that you were interested in, right? Then you had a team finally, and now you're CEO of a startup. You had money, right, as well. So you took external funding. How did you do the decision of taking external funding versus no funding or bootstrapping or whatever?
Because I wanted to work with all these professionals, right? And they had their financial obligations, so nobody would have joined me without the funding, or
probably
could not have joined me without the funding. I think we agreed that we would decrease our salaries, right? At that time, there was a lot of pressure from VCs on the founders. Like if you almost starve and cannot afford anything, you work hardest. So that has changed since then, right? Now, if you start a company, you can live an ordinary life in a way, right? Not a rich life, but an ordinary life. But at that point of time, they really wanted to see sacrifices in a way, right?
So if you would like divide the path of your Metaverse company like in 3 parts or 3 steps. So how did it get started? Maybe did you do some pivots? How was it progressing? And in the end, like how did you exit? How does the progress look like?
Well, we had a fast start because we had the money and some time to prepare. I remember at some last day of the month, I went to the CEO of my old company and put like 12 letters on his table, which were all resignations. Of course, he was not excited to kind of lose all the good people. And then we started very quickly, right? So after a few months, we had our first beta product already. This was like 3D worlds with avatars moving around, being able to move objects around, right? And you need to remember this was in the mid-90s, just internet starting, right? No 3D acceleration cards. So really like crazy and really miracle software. And if you say like 3 stages, the first stage was this wonderful period where everything got better every day. There was no revenue pressure yet. You were just building a wonderful product. Everything was exciting. So this was like paradise. And often this is the case in the early stage of the company that
I can relate to that.
Everything is so easy and wonderful. Right?
Yes. Perfect time. You always want to go back to that time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one reason why I just start companies. But unfortunately, then you get to the second stage where you need to generate revenues, right?
Yeah. Reality, some people call it, right?
Reality, yes. Because you are also very interested in SaaS, right? Basically, what we did at that time was already a SaaS business model, right? Without the word SaaS even existing, that was introduced later by Salesforce, I think. But it was software which you could rent, which was operated by us in a kind of single version of the software. So it was basically SaaS software.
So what is this business actually about? Franz is using something that's called SaaS, so software as a service business. So he's providing a software to his customers, and they are going to pay in a monthly and yearly subscription for the right to use the software.
And companies could buy a system from us, a client server with some multi-user interaction server on the one hand and kind of browser plugins or something that was kind of rendering the 3D experience, right? Which had to be installed by the consumers, which was a big issue. So second stage was really to convince companies to want to do such virtual worlds for their business, which did not exist as an idea, right?
Would you say there was a market or it was pre-market?
Well, today I would say there was no market.
Yeah, okay.
I think it was all enthusiasts and experimentation. But we managed to get more and more customers. Large companies like Canal Plus in France were building a virtual Paris. IBM was doing some stuff. Deutsche Bank was experimenting with virtual shareholder meetings. So we had a lot of customers and growing revenues. And that was like the second stage. But this was also influenced by all the up and downs of the internet industry, right? From the first day on, we had this team in Munich, but we also built a business team in San Francisco, which had a lot of implications. Like I was commuting every month between Munich and San Francisco, spending like 10 days over there, flying back again and so on. But then we were running out of money. So we had to kind of reduce cost again. I had to lay off a lot of people, especially in San Francisco. Then a year later, we did another finance round. I had to rebuild the team, which I hired like 30 people in the first attempt, went down to 5, went up to 50 again. So a lot of kind of roller coaster. And the third stage, if I divide it in 3, was really around 99 when we were encouraged to go public with a completely immature company from today's perspective, right? And so we were supposed to be the first IPO in 2000 at the Neuer Markt, which was a stock market which was established in Germany and disappeared afterwards again. And there were kind of some technical difficulties that we had to delay. And looking back in May, I think 2000, the internet bubble burst, right? And our IPO was delayed and finally was scheduled for August. And we did the roadshow and everything. And the last day before the IPO, the bank pulled the plug and we did not go public, which in the end killed the company, right?
Was this a surprising fact? Was it planned? Like, how did it happen, right?
It was completely surprising. So even the day before we went up,
So you planned your IPO, right? Everything was in place. And then at some point, somebody took the hammer and just hit you.
Yeah, it was. More and more IPOs had trouble to really get subscriptions in a way, right? To place it. And we did the roadshow. We were slightly oversubscribed, but not by much. In better time, we were like 8 times oversubscribed. We were like 0.2 times subscribed. And but it took us completely by surprise when we went up to Frankfurt to the bank, my CFO and myself, doing all the detail planning for the next day, already having all the suits in the kind of suitcase and so on.
So what happened to the company?
It went public after 1 year. After this IPO, we had a debt of almost 1 million because the bank still required us to pay for the IPO. And I was desperately trying to do a finance round at decreasing valuations. At the IPO, we were kind of valued at about 200 million euros. And then the valuation went down and down. And I finally managed to raise another few millions at, don't remember, 20 million valuation or something like this, right? But I had some trouble with some other shareholders and investors because they, in my view, wanted to take advantage of the situation and take more ownership of the company. So I could have raised more money, but they prohibited it, which was stupid because afterwards they ran out of money. And after having raised the money and stabilized the company, I left. So, and 6 months later, it was bankrupt. So
your first company, in like maybe 5 minutes or something, I can imagine that it feels like you could talk like 2 hours about all the experiences there. But if you were imagining someone starting, right, building their own company, trying to decide whether software or SaaS is something for them, right, or whether they should build something else, an agency, a consulting business, whatever it is, right, you would have to summarize to them like what you learned from this first experience and what you would have done differently, for example, right? So what would it be?
I think the most important learning purely from a business side was this window of opportunity, right? Because there was a window of opportunity for us even to go public. I think today it was completely immature to go public at all, but this was how the industry worked. Similar immature companies went public and got a valuation of billions and so on, right? Crashed afterwards. But I did not realize this window of opportunity. And if I would have accelerated everything, I think we would have went public. But this was a learning. And my last exit, we might come to this, I learned from that and I did better. I think there are 100 other things you learn, of course. A lot of things sound trivial, that you really need to be able to rely on your core team, right? Because without that, every company bursts. But of course, everybody founds a company with the best available people. I was lucky that I had really kind of an outstanding founders team.
I think founders team is really important, the good and the bad, right?
Yes.
Is there some recommendation from your experience how you choose your founder team? Like, should you hire your best friends or should you pick the most skilled people? Are you looking for this position? So how would you do it if we would do it now?
Yeah, most of them, as I mentioned, were from this company where I worked for 10 years, and they were the best people that I thought would work together well, right? They are good people, but they're not team players. So don't invite
you knew
them.
They weren't friends, but work colleagues or something?
Yeah, I think it was especially over time between colleagues and friends, right? Some of them knew each other already from university and were kind of friends. But in a startup with your co-founders, you automatically also become kind of friends. The exception was really the CFO, who was a guy whom I asked whether he would know a CFO. And I knew him because I went to kindergarten with him and then all the 13 years to school. And then he studied economics and worked for KPMG. And I went into computer science and he became the CFO of this company. Very capable person, but also a lifetime friend of mine.
And probably a lot of trust there, right?
Yeah, absolute trust, loyalty on both sides, I think. And he's still a friend of mine. And in the second year, just to mention this, our investor in the US who was investing in a lot of successful internet companies, older people might remember Lycos, which was an early Google, or GeoCities, which was an early Facebook. And they were $1 billion exits for our investor. And so they were in touch with the whole industry. And at some point of time, our investment manager said, well, Microsoft is interested in your virtual worlds technology. Would you want to talk to them? And we talked briefly and I said, no, we will never deal with Microsoft. We hated Microsoft at that time. So whatever they offered, we did not even talk to them.
And then they copied your team's approach, right, for the second company.
I don't know if they copied it, but looking back, this was completely stupid, right? The best thing we could have done is sell it for 10 million to Microsoft and with the money start the next company, which was a jump start, right? But we were very nerdy at that time.
I think this is like enough for one person's lifetime, right?
How
did you get up again and build your next company?
Well, that was also kind of interesting because at this first company, myself most and the others too worked tremendous hours, right? The first year, there was not a single week where I worked less than 100 hours. And if you think about it, wow, this is crazy, right? You get up in the morning at 7. I always lived outside of Munich. I always took the latest train at midnight or so. And I worked the whole weekends, right? Week for week, the whole year. And so after this, it was like 6 or almost 7 years. We all had like a little bit burnout. But what we decided was that we would start immediately the next startup. We became profitable after 8 months or something like this. And after just 2 years, we got an offer from a public British company that wanted to buy us for just a few millions.
So wait for the next part to figure out how he built his second business and got it to profitability in just 8 months.